Speaking of guns, if guns are so bad, then why does the Environmental Protection Agency need its own arsenal? You didn't hear about that? I'll tell you about that if we get a chance. First, though, I want to tell you you need to hear this show. Because if you don't, you're going to be left out in the cold, really, and nothing to do with this morning. We're up to 36, which is quite an improvement from where we started at. It's 8:43. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. If you're worried that you won't be able to hear this show, I would recommend that you pay a visit to Dr. Christine Pickup in Rupert. She's a doctor of audiology. She's at Mount Harrison Audiology. In fact, you can reach them, and this is fairly simple, MountHarrisonAudiology.com. Telephone number 208-312-0957. She can do a hearing screening for you. She's located at 1218 9th Street in Rupert, and that's unit number 2. Diabetes and hearing loss are linked, and of course, with the rise in diabetes, that means we're going to have more hearing loss in this country. If you or a loved one struggles with diabetes control, it could also be affecting your hearing. The inner ear is incredibly sensitive to changes in your blood supply. High blood sugars can cause hearing changes. Be sure to have your hearing screened today. I know a lot of people who, as we get older, I notice this with my own ears, and maybe at the moment it's just a perception issue, but I believe when I was talking to my sister last night on my cell phone, I thought it was easier to hear her out of my left ear than it was out of my right ear. Although some people eat the microphone when you're talking to them, and all you hear on the other end is, all right, Cindy, you can hold the phone away from your head a little bit, please. If she's listening this morning, she's going to be really, really upset. She does not like it when I talk about her on the radio, as I discovered during a Common Core discussion a couple of weeks ago, which she later heard on a YouTube video, and I got a lengthy email in response. It's a good thing that she's far, far away, and she has short arms anyway, so I'm not too terribly worried. Shorter than mine. Well, she's, women generally shorter than men, unless, of course, they're basketball stars. Am I stereotyping there? Gosh, I better go flagellate myself and apologize and do the apology tour and go down to the Liberal Club and prostrate myself in front of them. Or is it prostrate? Yeah, the other one is just a topic for another day. Speaking of guns, I got to get myself together here. Speaking of guns, here's a headline from the Daily Signal. Why did the Environmental Protection Agency spend $1.4 million on guns? See, guns apparently are bad for you, but for liberal bureaucrats, guns are a really good thing. $1.4 million. I mean, these people, don't they just go around testing water? Or in the case of Colorado, don't they go around fouling water, turning rivers funny colors and the like? Yeah, that's the EPA. That's the one that we all know and love. A writer by the name of Ed Fulner, who was the former director of the Heritage Foundation, he stepped aside and left most of the work up to Jim DeMint now, heavy lifting to Jim DeMint. He writes, the agency spends money like it's expecting the second coming next week. The Open the Books audit covered tens of thousands of checks the EPA wrote from 2000 to 2014, with hundreds of millions going towards such things as luxury furnishings, sports equipment, and environmental justice grants to raise awareness of global warming. Why not just open the window at the EPA? Hey, it's hot out today and it's all your fault. That would be a lot cheaper now, wouldn't it? Instead, these guys got to go around and offer these grants to fellow travelers, usually at universities, and then they open up the windows on campus and yell, it's really hot out today and it's all your fault. The writer goes on to say, Open the Books found that the agency has spent millions of dollars over the last decade on guns, ammo, body armor, camouflage equipment, unmanned aircraft, amphibious assault ships. Why? I don't know. Radar and night vision gear and other military-style weaponry and surveillance activities. Amphibious assault ships. So when they're following your rivers and turning them different colors, here in the western states, they can come rolling in on the ducks or whatever they have, and they can drop the landing gate and storm the beach, and then I guess they'd have to attack themselves for following that one river. Well, that might not be a bad thing. If they had eliminated themselves, think of the tax dollars we would save. They spent $1.4 million for guns at the EPA, $380,000 for ammunition, $210,000 for camouflage and other deceptive equipment. That's a good description. $208,000 for radar and night vision equipment, $31,000 for armament training services, and devices. In other words, over at the EPA, the bureaucrats can't actually shoot straight, so they had to go get them to some sort of practice range to try to like bone up on their skills. And the writer says, and the list goes on and on and on. It's 8:48. We have a caller with us. Our telephone number, if you'd like to join us, 736-0300. And you're up next on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. What's your comment or question?
Good morning, Bill. Well, it's the old adage, when you outlaw guns, only outlaws in and out of government will have guns. And what you're saying is, with the EPA, we keep funding it. It was never passed by an act of Congress. Most people don't realize this. EPA was created by an executive order. It could be eliminated by an executive order, and yet Congress puts billions and billions of dollars into this agency that's just eating out our substance and implementing, the United Nations Agenda 21. But I'd like to make a comment earlier about a blind eye turning a cheek the other way or looking the other way on the refugee thing. It's interesting that the local politicians mostly all showed up for the dog and pony show that the local newspaper put on.
Right.
And yet Pastor Hadian was here speaking 4 different times. There was only one senator, one representative attended any of those meetings. And of course, the newspaper vilified those guys on front page editorials. And so, folks, we better wake up because Sharia law, the Supreme Court, Bader Ginsburg, and Sotomayor.
I thought that was actually Ruth Bader Meinhof. They're related somehow, but go ahead.
Well, and so they're already implementing Sharia law, and of course that means just open chaos. Beheading of Christians and the open bringing in what you said about the Quran earlier. Yeah, it's all peace and brotherhood, but you need to read it like a novel and get to the end when they says, if they don't convert you, they're going to kill us. And as soon as they they don't need a majority just to get their influence, and they've taken over at Irving, Texas, Dearborn, Michigan, and places like that. And it's coming here if we don't stop it.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I thank you much for the call. Unfortunately, again, you've got people in government, I don't know if they're tone deaf or if they don't want to ruffle any feathers, or they're worried that some newspaper editorial will criticize them. People in government, my experience with politicians is they're the only people who actually read the newspaper any longer, but they assume everyone else does. And the fact of the matter is most people don't. Now, I'm not specifically identifying this local newspaper. In fact, one quick defense of the Times News. Somebody said to me the other day they weren't going to bother to read a story at the Times News because of the questionnaire, talking about it online. Well, the option is a paywall, but they'll allow you to read the news free if you answer a couple of marketing questions, so people in the advertising business can better figure out what people in this community like and how they can target advertising, and that helps pay for the news. In other words, they got to pay a staff, and they've got to keep a building open, and they've got to do those things. And so therefore, it's a little less, well, if you don't want to spend the money on a subscription online, answering a question or two, probably some people though don't want to answer those questions, and I understand that too. You don't know who's going to know what you like watching on TV or how many times you go to the movies, what music you listen to, etc. But at least they're trying to find an option to make it a little easier on you. So once in a great while, I have a nice thing to say about them over there. As I said, a great while. I mean, not very often. The comment about the EPA that our caller made, keep in mind that the EPA was created by Richard M. Nixon, who was supposed to be a Republican. And as our caller mentioned, he just created it out of thin air and set it in business. Later, it was Congress that gave the EPA that's called enabling legislation, because there's so much business now before Congress, they can't possibly handle all of it. So they turn around and basically tell the EPA, the Department of Education, Department of Housing and Urban Development, the list goes on and on and on. They tell these organizations, you can go ahead and make your own regulations. Well, you can call it a regulation or it's a law, and they make their own laws, and there's no representation from the people. We had a revolution over that, remember, at one point in this country, that people said you can't go around foisting laws upon us or changing laws without our consent. And yet here we have this going on now for 45 years in this country. And most people are like, yeah. What time's ultimate fighting on? 8:53. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 35. Nixon did that. Anybody who sits out there, and why we allow this to happen, this whole business, well, there was an executive order. Look, we have a Congress for a very specific reason. And the Congress is a co-equal. It is not subservient to the president. Nobody in the courts or in Congress is subservient to the president. These are co-equal branches. What presidents have been doing is akin to what the ancient Romans did when they decided to throw out the Senate and create emperors. The results of that ended up, how shall we put it, badly. At least for the Roman Empire, which got conquered because they opened the borders and said, yeah, come on in, all of you people from different cultures and backgrounds. Come on in. We'll all have a grand old time. You can work cheaply in our fields for us. And then, of course, when those people who came in took over the country, it was like, oh, how'd that happen? We're going down the same road. We are. I mean, we're absolutely going down the same road. There's a fellow I went to hear him speak a couple of years ago at the firehouse back in my old hometown. And he has I think it's called Institute for the Constitution. If you look that up, Institute for the Constitution, you can go take a look at this. And he's the fellow who founded it. He's a lawyer out of suburban Washington. And he made a great point. Executive orders are supposed to deal with things in the executive branch. In other words, people always say, well, George Washington issued the first executive order. Why do you complain when Barack Obama or Richard Nixon do that? Well, I'll tell you why. For this reason. Those were supposed to be, in the beginning, when George Washington looked around his offices and they needed ink, for instance, so they could get their quill pens writing, he issued an executive order that said, buy ink. So it was meant to apply within his executive office. It's not meant to apply to controlling our lives. So how did we let it get this far? I don't understand this. And yet, if we would only have a better understanding of what we're doing and what this is all about, this is why we need civics education back in our schools. But attempts to get that reinstated, you would think that you were calling on, crushing the people by just having them learn a little bit. 8:55, Bill Colley with you. So go to the website for Institute for the Constitution, and you can take a look at that, and you can find more details on this. But I think it was when I learned that, it was like a revelation to me. So even people in media don't know this, and apparently even there are people in Congress who don't know this, or they don't care. But it's true. I mean, and we are being ruled by fiat. That is, like a divine right king would say, all right, tomorrow we're all going to have to, wear high heels, men and women. And I'm using that as a rather absurd sort of comparison, but that's how it works. There's a movie from Woody Allen called Bananas, and Woody Allen helps assist in a revolution in South America, in some banana republic, and a Fidel Castro-type character takes control, and he goes out on the balcony after taking control of the country and said, tomorrow underwear are going to be have to be worn on the outside so that we can check that they're clean, something like that. And he's making all these ridiculous pronouncements. And this is what we're dealing with these so-called executive orders. President, he's not king. And he's not above Congress, and he's not above the Supreme Court, no matter how poorly the Supreme Court is run. But I'm astounded that most people don't know that. And I remember I was at some legislative breakfast or political breakfast one morning some months ago, and I ran into Jim Patrick. And remember, he had tried to get interest in civics education being taught in our schools again. And the lefties over at the newspapers, the editorial boards, tore him to pieces about that. And once again, you may not have known that because the average guy doesn't pay much attention to it. But all of a sudden, a lot of his, his colleagues and other people said, oh, good golly, they're going to claim we're archaic people. We better not do that. And so they backed away. But when Norman Lear, who's 93 years old now, he's the creator of All in the Family, who used to be a flaming liberal, says that he said at his 93rd birthday party a few months ago that he's now a conservative, and it was a slow march to get there. It's a good thing he lived a long time. But he said it just dawned on him one day that we've let things go so far that liberalism hasn't solved things for us. And he made a plea. He said, we need to bring back. We seriously need to bring back. And I just thought this was great. Civics education to this country. You're darn right. I think it would really help us. We would turn this country around rather quickly if people would just understand what their rights were and how it was supposed to operate. We're going to be talking about testing in our schools coming up in just a few minutes. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We've got a representative from the state legislature, a representative from Twin Falls Schools, and we may be getting a check-in as well from someone at the state education department. Hope you can stick around. It's almost 9 o'clock. News is next from Fox, right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.